Greetings, my name is Mika Strawhorn, and I'd like to share with you my observations of a high intermediate/advanced grammar class for adults held at Berkeley City College. My cooperating teacher was Beth, and she's been teaching ESL classes since 2006. For this project, I wanted to observe an adult class at the junior college level within my own community. I reached out to ESL teachers at a number of community colleges in the area and was ultimately invited to observe at Berkeley City College, or BCC, which is one of several campuses of the Peralta Community College District. Within the Peralta District, BCC is distinct from its sister campuses as the facilities and student population reflect a slightly more affluent and modern campus. BCC only offers high, intermediate, and advanced ESL classes. Students at lower proficiency levels are redirected to the other Peralta campuses. Summer session draws a younger student body than the regular school year, and the class I observed had a number of high school students from nearby Berkeley High in attendance. Most of the students in class were somewhere between 15 and mid-20s, with one or two older students. There were 22 in attendance on the day I observed. The campus is located in the heart of downtown Berkeley, not far from the UC Berkeley campus. Built in 2006, the campus is quite striking and modern, and the classroom facilities are state-of-the-art. My criteria for observation is based on my pre-interview with Beth as well as my own experiences teaching high school ESL. During our interview, Beth was not able to think of any criteria she wanted to address, so I asked her to email me if she thought of something. The next week, we had a chance to speak before class, and we adjusted and amended the criteria I had developed together. She helped me to refine one criteria, and together we decided to eliminate another in favor of one she had developed. Beth had the authority to choose her own textbooks for this course. During our pre-class meeting, she told me that after comparing notes with some other teachers, she was regretting her choice. However, the students had already purchased the book, so she was going to have to use it for the duration of the course. She was interested to know some of the methods of evaluation I was learning in this class, and I shared with her what I could. Beth creates her own tests, activities, and lessons, and has the freedom to adapt on the fly. The class I observed is a high intermediate/advanced grammar class that's held Monday through Thursday from 9 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. The lesson I observed was part of a week-long session on simple past, past perfect, and past continuous forms. I observed the class on a Monday, and it was the second week of classes. The previous week, students had written an essay about a turning point in their lives. The class I observed featured a grammar quiz and a peer review session. And here are my observations. Group dynamics. The students worked best and seemed most comfortable working in pairs. When asked to pair up, which happened 3 or 4 times during the class, students quickly found a partner and engaged promptly. One older woman was left out at first, but as soon as it was noticed by others, a threesome was created to include her. As a class, participation was dominated by a few vocal students. Group work was a mixed bag, with some groups gelling immediately and others struggling to connect or apply themselves to the task. I believe some of the students enjoyed working individually, but nobody seemed to resist group or pair work. Interactions. Students related well to the teacher. They were respectful, attentive, and seemed uninhibited to ask questions or request clarification. Students were also respectful of one another and maintained a congenial atmosphere throughout the duration. Interest. For the most part, student interest appeared to be sustained throughout. Towards the end of the group peer review activities, students began to check out, drifted off topic, or occupied themselves with their phones. Student Criterion 1. This one came about because Beth mentioned in our pre-interview that many of the students, about a quarter of the class, were schoolmates from Berkeley High School. I was interested in finding out if their existing relationship would affect the classroom dynamic. The group of high school classmates all sat together in a clump at the back of class. They chatted and goofed off in between tasks and definitely seemed to keep themselves slightly apart from the rest of class. Some of the other students, especially one or two of the older ones, seemed to recognize what was going on. When the teacher asked them to spread out a bit, they did so only superficially and then regrouped the first chance they got. When time came for group work and they were paired with others in the class, most of them integrated themselves into the new grouping with no problem. However, one of the students seemed reluctant to leave her friend's side and sat near her and talked with her even though they were in different groups. Criterion 2. I knew from my interview that there would be a peer review task, so I was curious about the students' reaction. The students were surprised and seemed a bit scared when it was announced that they would be doing a peer review. Many students weren't familiar with the concept and seemed apprehensive. Beth gave a little introduction, but was perhaps a bit too rushed. Once students got going, though, they seemed to apply themselves to the task without much hesitation. Student Criterion 3. This was one that Beth suggested. She was surprised by the variety of proficiency levels in the class and was wondering how best to address it. The class was meant to be high, intermediate, and advanced, but she felt that some of the students were at a significantly lower proficiency level. This was hard for me to determine because I wasn't really sure who in the class were at what levels. There were a few students who did not participate or contribute as much in group or class discussion, and I suspect, from what I overheard, that a few of them may have been on the lower end of the proficiency scale. A couple of the more reserved students seemed to be making an attempt at receding into the background. I'll now shift my focus to the teacher. This lesson was on simple past, past perfect, and past continuous forms and was contextualized by discussing things students used to do in a warm-up exercise and a peer review activity that was based on an essay students had written about a turning point in their lives, which necessitated the use of the past tense. During this lesson, Beth acted as instructor, moderator, and observer. As this was a grammar class, there was not a lot of teacher-moderated student discussion. I'd say that the teacher talk time was about 50-50. Beth outlined the lesson, gave instructions, answered questions, and checked for comprehension. Students did most of their talking during their group and peer review session. For the most part, students appeared to easily understand directions and explanations. The peer review activity would be the exception. Those instructions had to be repeated a number of times, and I noticed some students giving additional clarification to classmates. Beth seemed attentive to the needs of students, but didn't offer much in the way of praise to individuals. She did give blanket encouragement when discussing her reactions to reading the students' essays, which I think was very much appreciated. Beth was very positive in her feedback, but did not necessarily praise students extensively. The classroom facilities were truly state-of-the-art, and Beth had many aids at her disposal. There was an overhead projector connected to a computer so that Beth could project anything that appeared on the screen, including PowerPoint slides or accessing the web. There was also a nifty camera that allowed her to write on a piece of paper and have it projected on the overhead. These aids were very effective. During one timed exercise, Beth was able to project a countdown clock so students could keep track of how much time had elapsed. Key points and concepts were left up on the board so students could refer back to them. The class began with a warm-up exercise. Beth started with herself and wrote 3 statements about something in her past on the overhead, 2 true and 1 lie. Students guessed which of her answers was a lie and did the activity themselves with a partner using Post-it notes that Beth had provided. Then students had a planned test that was followed by a break. When students returned, they did a peer review exercise in groups on essays they had written earlier in the week. All activities were relevant and useful and emphasized the grammar covered for the unit. Activities were well planned and ran smoothly. However, time seemed to be an issue and some of the instructions and introductions were a bit rushed. For the most part, students were clear about what they were supposed to be doing. They were attentive and followed directions quickly and seemed to understand. The only exception was when the peer review was announced, perhaps not enough time was given to fully explain the process. When asked to pair up or form groups, students seemed to know the routine and did so with minimal fuss or milling about. Not much oral feedback was given beyond a simple "good job" for correct answers. Students did get general, positive feedback about their essays, and Beth gave individual notes to students on their essays, but I was unable to review these. When students asked a grammar question, Beth always tried to get them to think through the answer and find it on their own. If they were still stumped, she gave some hints, and if they were still stumped, she'd then give the answer. Beth began class by greeting everybody as they came in and asked about their weekends. She seemed to know most of their names already and knew something about them. Students appeared motivated to get a good grade on the quiz and also to do well in general. The atmosphere was positive and upbeat. Students were very attentive and hardworking, especially during the quiz. However, students did seem to run out of gas towards the end of class. Teacher Criterion 1. This was a question I was curious about since it was something I had struggled with in my own teaching. The groups for the peer review task were predetermined based on their essays, so I was not able to observe the process. Beth told me that she used a number of criterion, though, in dividing students up for the peer review. She took information from their essays. For example, 2 students had young children, so she put them together. Tried to get students to work with new people and break up the high school students. And she also took personality and proficiency into consideration. For pair work, she appeared to let students choose for themselves, and they generally worked with whomever they were sitting near. Teacher Criterion 2. All of the topics for discussion and the activities required students to use past tense forms. As noted previously, the warm-up was about things that you had done in your past, and the quiz was on past tense chapter that they had just reviewed. The essay they wrote was about a turning point in the student's past. Students had many chances to use grammar in a way that was directly related to their lives. Teacher Criterion 3. During our pre-interview, Beth told me she had never taught students as young as high school and wasn't sure what it would be like. I was curious to see if there'd be a difference in how she related to them. I saw no difference in how Beth interacted with students based on age. This was not as an informative criterion as I thought it might be because the majority of the students were similar in age, between 15 and 25. Only one student was significantly older. Apparently, this is common in summer sessions, and the age range is usually wider during the regular school year. Beth was very forthcoming and thoughtful during our debriefing session. We first discussed the basic principles and strategies she used to inform her lesson. Beth really wanted to have students develop a sense of self-awareness about the language and personal reflection about their work. She wanted to emphasize the process of writing over the strictness of grammar, and she wanted students to discover the rules for themselves. One strategy Beth used that I thought was very clever was that for the peer review exercise, she had students give feedback before she showed them her own feedback. She then asked them to compare her comments with theirs. Most students said that the feedback was very similar. This was done to allow them to see the value in their own judgments and to reinforce their buy-in on the peer review process. Beth did note some difficulties that she faced during the lesson. She was worried about the cohesion of 1 or 2 of the groups during the peer review process. A couple of the groups weren't working quite well together, and her efforts to encourage them were thwarted several times. She was also experiencing some timing issues, not having quite enough time for discussing the peer review process before it started. Another issue was she felt that the quiz seemed harder than she thought it would be, and that some students needed additional time over the break to finish. Beth offered 2 suggestions for improving the lesson. Firstly, she would have simplified the peer review activity, eliminating or simplifying the predetermined roles for the groups. Students were assigned roles such as coordinator, reader, and presenter, but they ended up confusing students and wasting time, and ultimately were not necessary. She also could have reviewed the time limits she set for each activity. Overall, Beth told me that the lesson was good, not great, and perhaps a bit more work and a bit less discovery than she would have liked. My suggestions for improvement would have been to introduce the peer review concept activity during the previous week before students wrote their essays. I don't think students were aware that their essays would be shared with their peers. This would have ensured enough time for students to better understand the concept and purpose of the exercise and may have eased their anxiety as they entered into the process. Another suggestion would be, even if it was a grammar class, I might have included a bit more guided class discussion. Finally, I would have liked to see if there was a solution that could be found to get the high school students to rearrange their seating cluster. I could see the difficulties in doing this given that it's an adult class and singling out that group for reseating could be problematic, but I think that it could be done. In conclusion, the part of the observation I enjoyed most was moving around and listening in on the groups as they did the peer review. It was very eye-opening, and I really felt like a fly on the wall. Nobody seemed to notice me, and I was able to observe a lot of different dynamics as each group had its own style. Some groups seemed driven by gender. One of the groups was all young men in their early 20s, and they chatted about their shared experiences and bonded over football. Another group was 3 women who really got down to business and worked very effectively together. Mixed gender groups, perhaps in part influenced by cultural background, took a bit longer to work and gel. It was all very interesting to me since my only significant teaching experience was in a single gender, single nationality, and single age situation, which poses its own set of dynamics. I was surprised when we did our post-lesson debriefing that Beth had observed many of the things that I thought only I had seen. This tells me 2 things: that it's possible to teach and observe at the same time, and that possibly I was spending more time observing the students than I was observing Beth. Beth is an extremely competent, engaging, thoughtful, and caring teacher, and I really learned a lot from her. Overall, this was a great experience, and I'm very thankful to Beth for taking the time over the last few weeks to answer all of my questions and for welcoming me into her classroom. Thank you for watching.